All right, folks, welcome back to the Whiskey Shaman podcast. Tonight, we're headed to Pennsylvania. Yeah, I know we've already been there, but we're going back where rye whiskey was born. To talk to our good people over at Liberty Pole, Jim over there, and these guys aren't just making whiskey; they're resurrecting a tradition, Monongahela rye, and all the other things they are doing over there. So let's dive into the history and the conversation that makes this so special. I had to do my little intro. You know how that goes. So, Jim, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. I want to preempt this by saying you just got off of working. You sent over some samples, so I think it's time for a drink. I don't know about you, but you were gracious enough to send over some samples, and these are the perfect sample size for somebody like me because I can enjoy it, but then I can sample it out to somebody who needs to try it. And it's a lot easier to ship stuff like this. So I thought, and you tell me how you want to go with this lineup. I thought we'd start with the bourbon since that's probably the lightest of the few. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Yep. So I'm gonna pop this open. If you want to tell us a little bit about this, this is Pennsylvania straight wheated bourbon whiskey, 46%, 92 proof.
Correct. So what I will tell you about the bourbon really, applies to pretty much every whiskey that we release. In that, I always like to stress that we are, double pot distilled, long fermentation time, sweet mashed, low barrel entry, 5-story traditional Kentucky rickhouse. So we have all those elements in common across all of our whiskeys. The bourbon, kind of what is really unique about the bourbon, besides the things I just mentioned, is that it is made with Bloody Butcher corn. So we don't really call that out on the label as much as, maybe some others do, and maybe we should, because it is a really tremendous grain, tremendous corn. But the mash bill for this wheated bourbon is 72% Bloody Butcher corn, 18% red winter wheat, and 10% malted barley. Like all of our whiskeys that are pot distilled, we love the pot distillation, the viscousness, the the kind of the earthiness of the Bloody Butcher corn.
You definitely get that on the taste. I'm sorry, I was in the background while you were talking, and I took a taste, and you stopped because you wanted me to come in on that. You can really taste that earthiness on it, and it really shows through on the palate, especially. Like it's not like, with some, I hate to say craft distilleries, but with some craft distilleries, you get this like barnyard funk, right? It's like a wet hay or something like that. I don't get that on this. This is just a very it's like a rich corn flavor. It's almost like kind of like a popcorn. I'm going to say it like a popcorn, but like maybe it's like toasted a little bit or something. I can't really explain the flavor, but it is really nice, and it's really sitting well with me right now. So sorry to interrupt, but continue your story with this, because this is very interesting. The fact that you're using 72% Bloody Butcher, a lot of people use that as an accent grain. They don't use it as as that much of it. And tell us a little bit for the listeners who might not know what Bloody Butcher corn is. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
So Bloody Butcher is it was a corn varietal that was very prevalent in the, kind of the eastern United States in the 19th century, in the mid 1800s. It was really a staple of the American diet, meaning that, it was consumed for humans, and it had a lot of flavor, right? Humans aren't going to eat something that they don't like. And so, a lot of bourbons, typically, they use number 2 yellow dent corn. That's a GMO corn. Makes great bourbon, but let's face it, it was developed as a GMO to feed cattle. Has a lot of starch. Those starches convert into fermentable sugars. But a lot of those bourbons, use that secondary grain is what they call the flavoring grain, either rye or wheat, right? We've all heard that. We think Bloody Butcher is our flavoring grain. The 2 yellow dent corn, it was developed to feed cattle primarily, and cows. They don't care what it tastes like, right? They're happy to eat whatever you put in front of them. So the thing about using Bloody Butcher corn, especially in the percentage that we use, that's our flavoring grain. We're getting a ton of flavor out of that Bloody Butcher corn. We use wheat in this particular. We also have a high rye bourbon, but what I sent you is the wheated bourbon. From our perspective, the wheat is less of a flavoring grain, but more of sort of a softening grain. We use wheat in a lot of our mash bills, including the Old Monongahela that I think we're going to taste later. We like wheat in those mash bills for the approachability, for the added maybe sweetness, the softening effect that wheat brings to a whiskey. So this wheated bourbon that you're tasting, I mean, we think it's very approachable. We think it has a lot of earthy flavors, nuttiness from the Bloody Butcher, and the approachability and the softness, maybe a little of the sweetness from the wheat. So that's kind of that's kind of our thought process behind the mash bill, and what we're doing here with our wheated bourbon.
Awesome. And I can tell you, I'm probably a minute and a half, 2 minutes after sipping, and I can still get the flavors in my mouth, which is really cool that it lingers that long. Because I'm guessing it's because of the double pot distilled, and now all those oils are coming over as well. And like you were saying with the Bloody Butcher, it just gives you so much flavor, and it's a unique flavor, and it's very for me it's making me want to go back and have another sip, which is the signs of a good whiskey, right? If you want to go back and have that second sip or that third sip of it, that's the signs of a good whiskey. So people are probably asking. They're like, okay, Liberty Pole. I know you guys are a larger brand, correct? Not Liberty Pole, but it's under another brand. Is that correct?
Well, so nah, not really.
Okay.
Our corporate, entity, which really that's our LLC, and all that really does is files the tax returns for us. It's called Mingo Creek Craft Distillers, and that we formed our LLC before we came up with kind of our brand. Liberty Pole Spirits is our brand, and everything we do whiskey wise kind of comes out under that Liberty Pole Spirits umbrella.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about the name Liberty Pole, because I'm sure there's some people in the audience going, well, what does that even mean?
So we are unbelievably fortunate to be able to open our distillery in ground zero of what is some of the most hallowed whiskey grounds in America, right? We are in Washington, Pennsylvania. It is ground zero for the events of 1791 to 1794, which was the, dubbed the Whiskey Rebellion, but it was the uprising of the Western frontier farmer distillers, uprising against the very unfair excise tax that was imposed by Alexander Hamilton, who was George Washington's Secretary of the Treasury. So during that period, this was the frontier, Randall. This was as far west as anybody really had settled in 1791. And, there were no roads out here. There was no government services. There was no protection from the natives. There was no currency. Whiskey was the currency, right? The farmer distillers here were primarily Scots-Irish, right? They had a lot of distilling knowledge that they brought with them. They left, their homeland because they disagreed with the taxation of the crown of England, right? They were taxed without being represented. So they said, screw that. We're going to move to this new country. We're going to fight for independence. Most of the farmer distillers here had fought in the Revolutionary War. They settled out here on the frontier. They started making whiskey from rye, which was the crop that was basically most readily available. And all of a sudden, this new out of touch government starts taxing their whiskey. And, you know, they felt like they were back in their homeland with this new government taxing them. And so it was a very, you know, tumultuous time. And, you know, it was the first major test of this new government. And George Washington eventually assembled a militia of 13,000 men to march on Washington, Pennsylvania, to arrest the ringleader of this rebellion. And, you know, it's just such a cool history to have. And Liberty poles were the kind of the symbol of opposition. All during colonial times, Liberty poles actually have their root back in ancient Greek times, but they have always been a symbol of protest. And during the colonial period of America, you know, before we gained independence, Liberty poles were raised in opposition to British English rule. Once we gained independence and this new excise tax came into place, Liberty poles were raised to protest the excise tax on whiskey. And a Liberty pole is simply a big, you know, a tree trunk, right? That you would cut down and you would erect it, you know, in the town square on your farm. And it, you know, usually had a banner on it that carried the message of, you know, down with the excise tax. And, you know, if you were a federal tax collector and you saw that you were approaching a farm that had a Liberty pole, you know, you would tread lightly going into there, because you know that those folks were not gonna, you know, be happy to see you. So
that is such a cool story, because it really just encapsulates not only American history but whiskey history in general, and that's super cool. That's super cool, and to see that you guys are not only right in the middle of it, but you're resurrecting. So let's talk a little bit about y'all's distillery. How long have y'all been in operation? And obviously you make whiskey, but you make other spirits as well. Is that correct?
No, we only make whiskey.
Okay.
We do have a bourbon cream liqueur that we have on the shelves, which is a cream base that we obviously, you know, aren't farmers, aren't dairy farmers. So we source a cream base, but we actually do the blending of that bourbon cream in-house using our straight bourbon. We also have a gin. And again, it's the only distilled spirit that we have on our shelves that we don't distill. We do source the gin.
Okay.
And we do, you know, kind of take that and age it in our used bourbon barrels for a year. So
that's cool.
We do kind of apply a little bit of magic to it, but for the most part, you know, we only make whiskey. We have been in business for almost 10 years to the public, 12 years since we incorporated our, you know, LLC. So, you know, so awesome. we are kind of one of the, I like to call it the second wave of American craft distillers, right? So, you know, we're behind the pioneers, but we're in that second wave in the 2014, 15, 16 era.
Right. Because I will tell you, and the listeners and viewers will know this, you know, after having Stolen Wolf on, and then I've had Herman with Dad's Hat on, and even JJ,
all my friends on.
Yeah, even JJ Jackson, who did the Moonshiners, having all of these people on, it just goes to show not only the whiskey that's coming out of Pennsylvania, but the people that are there. And we were talking off camera right before we pressed record, how you guys are trying to do a revival of rye whiskey, because I know Stolen Wolf is doing it, and you know Herman's been trying to do it for a minute, and so it's like it's really cool to see you guys. So I guess the question is going old school with a new technique. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we try to be as old school as possible while still taking advantage of modern technology, right?
Right.
We run very basic pot stills, you know, but we do take advantage of a steam, low pressure steam boiler. We're not direct firing any of our pot stills, but our pot stills have absolutely zero automation on them. Everything we do on those stills is manual and sensory, right? We're evaluating the distillate coming out of that still, and we're making our cuts based on proof and temperature and taste and smell, and so in that sense we are honoring as much of the old world styles as we can within reason, right?
Right.
The guys at Mount Vernon, Steve Bayshore, God bless them, they are keeping that alive, with their direct fire stills.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking a little bit of a advantage of modern technology, but still holding on to as much of that craft as we can.
Absolutely. Yeah. My buddy Alan Bishop has talked about Mount Vernon quite a bit. And
yes.
he's gone up there quite a bit to help out and run mashes. And it's hard work doing it the old school way. And why not use some of the, you don't have to totally automate everything and have everything on a computer and, to where there's no human interaction, but you can also make it a little easier for yourself. Good Lord. You don't want to have to stoke a fire for 12 hours. That's hard enough to do when you're making barbecue, let alone when you're making whiskey all day, every day, So I can see how using that, even that little bit of technology makes it that much easier. But obviously when you're dealing with a pot still, they can be a little finicky, right? They got to get everything just right. And so have you guys pretty much honed in the way your distillation practices and, where your cut points are and all those?
Oh yeah. We think we have, it's been 9 years of running these pot stills, and, you are 100% correct. They are finicky, in terms of, just temperature and steam and flow rate, and, adjusting that for, the ambient temperatures and humidities. But, that's something that, and my sons kind of run the production area back there. They're mechanical engineers. So they kind of have that scientific mindset, and they've put together, pretty rigorous set of SOPs that, they know how to operate those stills under a myriad of conditions and different types of whiskeys we're making.
Right. So, talking about back of the house stuff, let's talk a little bit about, if you want to divulge this information, that's fine. Still size, what you're running with. Are you, you have two separate stills, one for stripping, one for finishing, or how are you running everything?
We do. So we just moved into a new, we built a new location from the ground up 2 years ago, and we moved in July of 2023. So we've been in our new facility, our new campus, for 2 years. When we moved in, we upgraded our distillation capacity. We kind of tripled what we were able to do in the old place. So right now we have, our brewing side is, we have 1,000-gallon mash cooker, 4,000-gallon fermenters. We have a pretty sophisticated grain handling system, so we don't have to handle 50-pound sacks of grain and hand scoop into the mill. But we do everything, kind of from grain to distillate in-house. We mill all of our grains the day that we're going to mash them in. So we do a 6-day ferment, which I think again is a little bit outside the norm. Primary fermentations are, they're usually done in 72 hours. You're not going to get a whole lot more ethanol out of a fermentation after 3 days, but you do get a lot more flavor if you're not kind of forced by the accountants to empty that fermenter and fill it back up and make more whiskey. So we love having the luxury of doing a 6-day ferment, because those extra 3 days in the fermenter, we have a lot of wild yeast in the facility. We have a lot of bacteria, and I'm talking, good bacteria, the kind of bacteria that you'll get in yogurt. And those bacteria, they consume the residual sugars, they produce organic acids, and those acids, they will aspirify in the barrel to produce just amazing, fruitiness in the final product. So we do that 6-day ferment. Then we have 1,000-gallon Vendome pot still. We were so happy to be able to get a pot still from Vendome, and the day that it was shipping from Louisville, Kentucky to Washington, PA, it actually was loaded on a truck that the height was too high, and it smacked off a bridge in Cincinnati. Had to be taken back to the Vendome in Louisville on a wrecker. Had about a month worth of repairs before we could get it back at the facility. But it's a great still. We love it. Vendome is the Cadillac of equipment for a reason. It's just a fantastic stripping still. And then we brought over with us from our old location a 600-gallon still that in our old location, it served as both a stripping and a spirit still. Right. Now it is dedicated as a spirit still. So we do all of our stripping runs in the Vendome and then do the spirit runs in the 600-gallon Specific Mechanical still that we got from Specific Mechanical. They're out of Victoria, British Columbia.
Yeah, I've heard of them, and it's really cool to hear that. I mean, I can picture it in my head. Just all the layout of everything and how it's gone and all the piping and everything for it. It's really cool just to kind of get a background of it. So let's talk about something that I don't know if you've had to deal with it yet since, I don't know how long this takes, but I was at a distillery recently and they had their pot still that they use for their finishing, and it's all copper, right? And it had developed a leak because of the alcohol in there has ate through the copper. How often do you have to deal with repairs on a still that size?
So we have not had to deal with that yet. Our oldest still is the 600-gallon spirit still, which we brought in 2019. So that's about 6 years in operation now.
Right.
Every time you run a still, right, the copper basically catalyzes, sulfites. And so every time you run a still, a little bit of that copper sacrifices itself for the good of the whiskey. And so eventually, that copper will thin and it will leak. We've been told, that doesn't happen for, 15 years or so. So I think, we've got a while to go before we have to worry about that. But yeah, I mean, that is definitely an issue, with pot still, any stills really.
Right. Absolutely. I don't think I've ever talked about that on the show before. And I thought it would be something cool to bring up and also you have to think of the copper in those stills. And I don't know this for a fact. I would think it would be a lot thicker than like say a copper pipe or something like that. It's a little bit thicker than that. So because I'm a plumber by trade, so I work with copper, not so much anymore. We've moved to PEX and everything, but anyway, I work with copper a lot, and you can see on the inside with the hard water and stuff like that, it patinas and it does all this stuff. And it's really cool because it is it's not living, but it's kind of a living thing. And like you're saying, it's transferring all those sulfurous compounds, and it's basically sacrificing itself to make the product better and take away some of that things. And it's really cool. And that's why they used copper back then. Cause I mean, it's not the cheapest thing to use, but they used it because of the flavor that it gave. And you hear about the old, Scottish distilleries where, they got a ding in their copper. And then when they had to buy a new still, they beat the brand new still. They put a new, exactly. Because they want to make sure that it tastes the same, which is really cool. I don't know. It might just be, semantics at that point, but it's really cool to talk about, because obviously me being on this side, talk about the plumbing of it and stuff like that, because that's a big part. Okay. So while you were talking, I haven't sipped it yet, but I opened up the Old Monongahela Proof Rye Whiskey. This is coming in at 54%. Now I will tell you, I don't know. I can't remember if I've had Monongahela. Maybe I have. I've had, like I said, I've had quite a few Pennsylvania distilleries on, and I don't even know if does Herman use Monongahela?
So let me kind of back up a second, give you
Go
kind
ahead.
of the overview of, what Monongahela rye whiskey is, or,
Absolutely.
even Monongahela style rye whiskey. So in general, we kind of subscribe to the theory that Monongahela rye was rye whiskey that was distilled in Pennsylvania, that is basically consists of a high rye mash bill, meaning more than 51%, right? So our mash bill on our Monongahela rye is 75%. Also, with enough malt to to convert all the starches to sugar. Herman uses a 85% rye, 15% malted barley mash bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in pre-prohibition days, back in the colonial days, there were not artificial lab enzymes to convert. You had to use malted grains to convert starches to sugar. So Monongahela rye was, high rye, sufficient malt to convert starch to sugar, sweet mashed, pot distilled, and made in, and this is where we kind of have a little bit of a flag in the ground, made in the Monongahela River watershed, which, Herman is not in the Monongahela River watershed. We will never kind of deny him the ability to claim that he's making a Monongahela rye, because he really is. Herman is a dear friend. He makes great whiskey. We just did a collaboration with him.
I saw that
a week ago. Yeah. And Herman is definitely making a Monongahela whiskey. Our friends at Stolen Wolf, they're making a Pennsylvania rye. Now, whether that categorizes, that falls into kind of a more narrow definition of Monongahela rye. They're using a column still, which really wasn't a part of Monongahela rye, but it was certainly a very important piece of Pennsylvania rye. So, so as we kind of go through the check boxes and kind of things that we want to do to define Pennsylvania rye, there's a lot of stories and a lot of history that we have to, we want to basically uplift all Pennsylvania rye. We're all on a mission to, really revive Pennsylvania rye. And, there's a number of different styles and varieties. But, we kind of hang our hat on, what we call Monongahela rye. Once was the most famous whiskey in the world, probably. In the 1800s, if you mentioned Monongahela rye to anybody, they probably knew what you were talking about.
Well, and it was a treasured thing, right? It was something that you were like, oh, that's Monongahela rye. I know it's going to be good. Right. And so the cool thing is, this was my ignorance, and I apologize for that. I thought that Monongahela was like a type of rye. I didn't realize that it was just a style of distillation, which is really cool, coming from the region. And so it's kind of like me being from Texas, right? Texas whiskey. Well, there's 50 million different types of Texas whiskey, right? But it's from Texas. It's a specific type, and so that to me is really cool. That you explained that. And if you want to go into further detail, go right ahead. Just smelling this, like the oiliness on it is so much. It's clinging to the glass. I haven't even took a sip of it. And you're saying this is foolproof at 108 proof. Let's talk a little bit about your barrel entry proof and stuff like that. Because I know with particularly with the older styles of whiskey and rye whiskey especially, they went in at a very low barrel entry proof. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. And one of the pre-prohibition kind of characteristics of Monongahela rye was a low barrel entry plus a heated warehouse. And we have friends at a newer distillery called Iron City Distilling. If you've ever had Iron City beer, that brand has been kind of revived, and the new owners have also opened up a distillery, and they're making, they bought a 3-chamber still. It's only the second 3-chamber still in the country after Leopold Brothers. They're doing a great job of kind of making that pre-prohibition Monongahela rye. They do have a steam heated warehouse. They have a chamber still. We kind of differentiate their style from our style, and that we're more of a colonial style Monongahela rye, where chamber stills hadn't been invented yet in 1794. So we're pot distilling, and there were no heated warehouses. But Monongahela, we actually have a working group of Pennsylvania distillers that we're trying to really get our arms around how we can kind of define and revive Pennsylvania rye, because it is a style and a history that certainly deserves reviving and recognition. And you may be familiar with Overholt. Yeah. And they came out a few years ago with a Monongahela mash version of A. Overholt. And that was a mash that pretty much is what Herman is using at Dad's Hat, 8515. Obviously they're distilling it in Kentucky. They're distilling it on a column still. So it kind of falls off the map a little bit in terms of what we think of Monongahela rye whiskey is. But simply those guys putting that on their label, Monongahela mash, that generated more publicity and more recognition for Monongahela rye than we could have ever hoped to achieve. So we're all about that. I mean, that's a recognition that we were happy that they did that, and we hope more and more people can come to know and appreciate and love and seek Monongahela rye.
Absolutely, because I can tell you, just off of one sip, I am in love. And I don't say that very often. I've been really on a rye kick lately. I've been trying to get into different types of rye. And I can tell all the listeners and viewers that this is unlike any, it's a rye whiskey. Don't get me wrong. It's not a different rye, but like, it is unlike any Kentucky rye you've ever had. It's not the MGP 95.5 rye, because that is like all mint and dill and all of those things. This is so complex. I can't even tell you, how most people say it has that rye spice, and that's kind of a cop-out type term for rye whiskey, right? Because I feel like it deserves a little bit more than that. I feel like there's like a cardamom, and it has like almost like a sarsaparilla or something like that on it, and it's so sweet. The sweetness of it is there. It's just so inviting, and I can't thank you so much, because I know some people that would really enjoy getting a sample of this, and I can't wait to let them have a taste of this, because this is what I picture. I can put myself back in that time when the settlers were making this type of whiskey. Now, I will tell you, and we've already talked about this on different podcasts, but back then they didn't age a lot of their rye whiskey, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And that's where, the fact that our whiskey says Old Monongahela, old back in those days referred to brown whiskey, right? Meaning that it had gone into a barrel. Most of the whiskeys, especially in the era that we're talking about, were clear, were white dogs. So when you were able to get your hands on some old Monongahela rye, you really had something, because that had been aged.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. Do you have like a age statement on it, or is it just like a lot of your other people from Pennsylvania? They're just like, when it tastes good, we take it out.
So we, again, I think any distiller would probably fully agree that, we let the whiskey kind of tell us when it's ready. Mm-hmm. We have just kind of passed that threshold where we actually don't have an age statement on our whiskeys any longer, because we've passed that 4-year mark. any barrels that we evaluate for inclusion in a blend, and the Old Monongahela is a blend of, it's a very small batch blend, but it's a blend of multiple barrels. We don't evaluate any barrels that are under 4 years old. And let me tell you, Randall, it's been a long 9 years for us to finally, be able to say that. We have had to, and we've tweaked our, kind of our production techniques to allow us to sample and use some younger whiskeys. You don't go as deep into the tails when you know that barrel's likely not going to make it for 4 years. But, we are now fully on board with, 4+ year old whiskey across all of our products. So the bourbon that you tasted, everything we're doing right now is a blend of 4+ year old whiskeys.
That is really cool. But like you say, you let the whiskey speak for itself. And I'm sure that you can release whiskey younger if you wanted to, but also, having it at the 4-year mark, you don't have to put an age statement. You don't have to do anything with it. You just kind of leave it at that. And I will tell you, in the glass, it tastes, I would have said it was a 6 or 8 year old whiskey, just because of the complexity of the barrel and stuff like that. And we can talk about this because this is a big part of whiskey making is the barrel, right? And finding a good barrel source, making sure that the barrels are, toasted and charred right. And are you using a specific type of toast and char? Tell us a little bit about the barrel.
So you alluded to it earlier, but we do have a barrel entry proof of 108 across all of our different whiskeys, our ryes, our bourbons, our peated whiskeys. Everything goes into the barrel at 108. And, we really like that proof level because, as a younger distillery and even a 4-year-old whiskey, a lot of people would consider young. But to be able to go into the barrel at 108, which means, we're adding water from the proof that we get off the still. Our proof off the still is, just a bit north of 130 proof. So we proof that down before it goes into the barrel. And the sugars in those barrels in the wood are more soluble with water than they are with ethanol. So by being able to go in at a lower proof, with more water, we're able to kind of more easily extract those sugars, which add, a lot of those caramel and vanilla and typical barrel flavors at a quicker pace than saying, having to leave it in a barrel for 8 years. We're able to extract those flavors, a bit quicker. We also, you asked about the barrels. Right now, we are using pretty much a 50-50 blend of barrels that we get from the West Virginia Great Barrel Company. They're, fairly local to us, cooperage down in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And then also we use Calvin Cooperage, which everybody knows Calvin barrels.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as we think we know, both of those cooperages are sourcing staves from the same stave mills, which are primarily Appalachian oak, which we love because, Pittsburgh is often considered to be on the edge of Appalachia, if not in Appalachia. So, so we love the localness of the wood that we're using. We do like heavily toasted barrels. So all of the barrels we get are heavy toast. Now we are still experimenting with, light to medium char. So, we'll get heavy toast, light char, heavy toast, medium chars at about 50%. And, that's kind of an ongoing thing that we look at, but the heavy toast is something that we're, 100% committed to. We just think that the flavors that we get out of a heavily toasted barrel are much better than, than the light to medium toast. And the reason we go with a lighter char is that, we just don't think it's a good idea to burn away all that great toasting that you've done with a deep char. So, so I think that's kind of where we're headed right now. And we're pretty happy with what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it brings up the question, We talk about Kentucky bourbon and Kentucky rye whiskey, and you guys aren't trying to make that, and I know that. But they have a barrel entry proof of 125, and they use number 4 alligator char. Is that? And I'm not trying to throw any Kentucky distillery under the bus or anything. Is that because they're trying to get more bang for their buck? Because you would think they would put it at a lower entry proof and be able to get more whiskey in the barrel. I understand the char level because the char is active charcoal that mellows the whiskey in the barrel. But why do you think they're putting it in at such a high proof as well?
You know what, Randall? I mean, I don't have any insight. I've never talked to the big guys, but for my perspective, it's purely economic, right? We do 600 barrels a year. That's our production capacity, 600 barrels a year. To proof down from 130 proof to 108 proof, we might add, I don't know, 10 gallons, 15 gallons of water, which means we might use maybe 15 extra barrels a year, maybe 20 extra barrels a year. Barrels are $400, $300 a piece. So, I mean, it's expensive for us, but, it's certainly we can manage that. But, if you look at the guys that are making 1,000 to 2,000 barrels a day, if you think what the impact of, proofing that liquid down, expanding that volume, the additional barrels they would have to buy. I mean, it's millions and millions of extra dollars of barrels. And, I think it's really economics. I think if they could, they would. And there are some that do, right? Peerless, although they're more of a smaller, more of a, craft, they do a lower barrel entry. I know Michter's does a lower barrel entry. Yeah. So the guys that are kind of the mid-size Kentucky, they do use the lower barrel entry, but I just don't think economically the really big guys could do it. And I totally get why they do that. But then, to their credit, they're able to let that whiskey sit for, 8 years, which, counteracts some of the, the benefits that we get out of the lower barrel entry, being able to pull it at a younger age. They're able to let it sit and, kind of get those same effects. So,
Right. Well, and then now they've developed a culture, especially in the whiskey community, of bourbon guys that want the really high proof, the 130, the hazmat, all of that. And so they're drawing that crowd as well, which I know it's a very small niche, group of people, but at the same time, I would prefer, like, one of my favorite proofs on a whiskey is bottled in bond, 100 proof. Like, you can add some water to it, you can drink it straight, whatever you want to do. It's really kind of the perfect balance right there.
Yep. Yeah, though the hazmat, releases are, they definitely have resonated recently. And that's one thing that, going in at 108, we're not going to have, a 140 plus whiskey. No. It's not going to happen. But we're fingers crossed that doesn't become, kind of the overarching industry norm, to have that, hazmat proof whiskey. And I don't think it will, because I'm like you, and I know there's a lot of people that like the sweet spot of 100 to 115 proof. And that's certainly my sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like, and this is just personal, whiskey experience, I guess, I feel like that the hazmat boom is gonna really break off pretty fast, because you can only have so much hazmat whiskey. Like, you have one little pour of hazmat, it's like you've had 2 or maybe even 3 pours of another whiskey, and it's like, what are you doing? You're gonna burn your taste buds. Yes, it is like concentrated whiskey. I get all that, and a lot of times they're putting them in smaller barrels to try and get that proof up higher. They're trying to make it get there instead of letting the whiskey talk for itself. They're trying to edge it on and do all these other, sometimes shady things to the whiskey just to make it that high a proof. Yeah. I've heard of distilleries even adding neutral grain spirit to their whiskey to get it that high, which I'm like, hey, that's on you. But it's, to me, where you have it at 108, oh man, it's right there. It's right there, because it still has all the oil, the viscousness, and the little bit of proof ding that you want. But yet, I have no problem drinking it. It's not overpowering, and all the flavors that are there are very nice. And I'm sure, not that I'm going to do it, but I'm sure that stands up to an ice ball or in a cocktail. I'm sure it stands up really well.
Well, kind of our interpretation of foolproof, and there's no government definition of foolproof, but
No.
we have it on the label. But our definition for this release is that it goes into the barrel at 108. Whatever barrels we select for the blend are probably going to come in around 110 to 112. So we will add, a bit of water. So it's not barrel strength, but we bring it back to its original barrel entry / foolproof for the bottling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's what's really, really crazy is like, trying to chase, everybody's chasing numbers, and I don't care for it, because I've had some great whiskey that's 18 months old and 45% alcohol. So it's like, I don't know, it's pretty crazy. So let's talk a little bit about the surrounding area of Pennsylvania and the climate, and how that kind of affects the whiskey making process. I know you guys get pretty cold in the winter, but you also get rather warm. I was talking to somebody who was in Buffalo, New York a week or so ago, and they said it was like still 85 degrees there. So how does the temperature affect you differently than some of the other places?
Randall, I think we have basically the same climate that they do in Kentucky. We have similarly hot summers. We have similarly cold winters. They may get a couple weeks more of warm weather than we do, but our climate is basically very similar to Kentucky. We sit actually, and this may sound sacrilegious to Kentucky people that are listening, but we sit on the same limestone shelf that Kentucky does. We're not drawing our water from an aquifer, but we've had our water tested. We've got great minerality in our water. It's a great water for making whiskey. So the climate here and the water sources are very similar to our friends in Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee. The one thing that I think we have really struck gold on is we decided when we were moving to our new campus to actually, take the plunge and build a 5-story barrel open air rick house, like all the big boys use in Kentucky. We hired Busick Construction out of Bardstown, Kentucky. They came in and they built us. It's a 5-story rick house, horizontal storage, 3,600 barrel capacity, which they were laughing. They said, they'd never built a 5-story warehouse this small. They had built smaller rick houses, but they were never 5 stories. But to have 3,600 barrels in 5 stories, it's pretty special. It sits on a hill. We get a lot of airflow. We have all the advantages of horizontal storage and open ricks. But the beautiful thing about a smaller footprint is that we have no like vast middle ground. When you think about the thermal mass of the liquid and how long it takes that liquid in a 70,000 barrel rick house to heat up in the summer and to cool down, even between day and night. I mean, our barrels are experiencing, a lot more temperature variations and fluctuations in that small footprint than the massive warehouses elsewhere. So I think that's kind of one of our big advantages. We just have a world-class rick house, and we've been in there for 2 years now, and we are really starting to notice the effects of placement. Whether they're on the 3rd floor, the 5th floor, whether they're on the northeast or the southwest wall. I mean, we're really seeing kind of those zones, and it's so much fun to kind of uncover the different secrets of that rick house.
Absolutely. And play with it and be like, oh, this one, because every Rickhouse has its sweet spot. You know, the Coy Hill Rickhouse, Jack Daniels, Camp Nelson C or B, whatever that is. You know, everybody has their like sweet spot. And for you to be able to find like, it's this one right here. This is the one that makes the unicorn of unicorns. You know, the best whiskey we've made comes out of this. And then, I mean, it just makes you think about, wow, we could sell this as a single barrel and it would be absolutely fantastic, or it would really accentuate this blend that we're doing in such a way. And it's really cool that you guys are on the cutting edge of your Rickhouse, because you can kind of play with it. And obviously it's a lot of work. It's a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of, oh man, you got to go in there and sample the barrels and stuff like that. But it's also, it's a little innovative, because like, you know, you guys are doing it the way you want, but yet you're getting these results that are really fascinating to you guys, which is super cool, because you're staying in your lane, but like you say, you're innovating a little bit and going beyond the boundaries, which is really cool with everything that y'all are doing. Yeah, it's crazy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so while we were talking, I opened up the last one, and this one, I'm not going to say I was the most excited for, because I was the most excited for it. But this is none other than Pennsylvania Straight Peated Rye Whiskey, 55.8% ABV, 111.6. I don't know a whole lot about peated rye whiskey, so tell us a little bit about this. I'm super excited about it.
So we are one of the few, you know, American craft distilleries that kind of dabble with peated grains. And, you know, I will tell you that my wife, you know, we're a family-owned distillery, and I mentioned that my sons are very, very talented distillers, and they run the back of the house. Well, my wife is kind of the brains behind our branding and, you know, kind of our cocktail program. And she's, you know, so important to what we do. And, you know, I started distilling as a hobby, you know, 20 years ago, never intending to do anything more than, you know, have a hobby. And, you know, I was making all grain mashes, bourbons and ryes. Well, my wife is a huge Isla fan. She loves peat. She loves peated scotches. The peatier, the better. And one day she just basically said, you know, why don't you make anything that I like? And, you know, I hadn't made any peated whiskey. So, you know, when you're operating a 10-gallon still, you are buying your grains from a brewery supply store. Well, if you know anything about beer, peated malt is really not. Smoky beers are really a niche. And, you know, there are some Scotch ales that might have some peated barley, but they're few and far between. So my brewery supply store sold peat in, you know, several ounce bags. I mean, tiny, and they were expensive. And I started doing the math of, okay, what would it take me to do a 10-gallon mash, you know, buying this peated malt at a couple ounces a piece? And I'm like, I can't do that. So I got the idea, well, maybe I'll just add it as a kind of a secondary grain to a bourbon mash. And so that the peated bourbon was born. And that was kind of our first, you know, kind of whiskey that got us a little recognition. And, you know, living in Pennsylvania, being huge rye whiskey proponents, we loved our peated bourbon, but we started thinking, man, how would this go with rye? So, you know, we started doing some peated rye mashes, and, you know, it quickly became our favorite peated expression. You know, it's gained a lot of kind of notoriety. Fred Minnick has put it on his top 100 American whiskeys 2 of the last 4 years. A couple different podcasts and reviewing sites have named it their rye whiskey of the year the last couple of years. Very unique whiskey. It's a mash bill of 60% Danko rye, which is our rye grain of choice, 30% heavily peated malt that we source from Scotland, and 10% malted barley. And, you know, the balance of peat, smoke, and rye herbalness, that they are just, it's such a balanced whiskey that, you know, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know what you're tasting on it yet, Randall, but I know when I drink it, you know, there are days where, depending on what I've had to eat, I may struggle to find the peat. It may present itself as like very rye forward. The next day I can drink it again, and oh, there's the peat, smacks me in the face. And and that's what I love. That's what to me like is a really balanced whiskey, and that depending on your mood and your palate and what you've had to drink and how your day has gone, it's going to present differently on different days, and that's what I love the most about this peated rye.
Absolutely, and I will tell you, for me the peat is up front. It's a little forward, which I love because I'm a big Isla fan as well. And so it's really, but on the nose, it's all sweetness. It's all like that barrel candy. And then you get the little bit of rye, which is like maybe even like a wicker, I like a wicker chair or something like that. It's just, and then when you get on the taste, it's not like the ashtray or anything like that. It's just like a subtle smoke, but it's not like mesquite smoke or anything like that. It's a subtle smoke and salinity. It gives it a salinity that makes it like almost like cocktail like in the glass. And then the smoke lingers and it gives you that like when you walk away from a campfire smell. And it's just so inviting and really good. The proof point is perfect on it. I couldn't fault this whiskey if I wanted to. Obviously, this is the first sip out of it, so I'll probably do a full review on it later on. But that is what's so cool about what you guys are doing and a lot of other distilleries are doing. You're not afraid to, hey, let's try it, because you're not constrained to, yes, obviously you have to make stuff and get it to market to sell it because you got to make money, right? That's the whole point of doing what you're doing, to make a little money, right? But like, try this new thing and try, okay, we did it with the bourbon. Now let's try it with the rye. Oh Lord, with the rye, it's even better. Not that the bourbon's not great, but like now it's even better with this because you get a little bit of those rye notes along with the peat. And like you're saying, each day that you drink it, it could change and it could turn into something else. And that's what makes whiskey. And especially when you do something like this, not experimental, but kind of an experimental whiskey, it makes it so unique because it's really based. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure type whiskey.
Right.
Yeah. It's so inviting. Really, there's so much there. So that was going to be one of my questions. Have you ever played around with like malting the rye?
So our no, there are good maltsters, and we're going to leave the malting process to those guys. We do our Monongahela rye that you tasted prior to this. That does contain 13% malted rye.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we do play with that in terms of adding it to mash bills. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, because I know from talking to other people, this is a big deal. How hard is rye whiskey to work with when you're mashing and all of that? Because I've heard it's a pain in the butt.
It's a lot harder than bourbons, for sure. It's rye is a temperamental grain. It's sticky. It's it's viscous. We have actually done a couple batches of 90, the 95.5.
Yeah.
We're pretty, I think our rye mash bill is pretty manageable in that, the base rye of our Monongahela rye is 61% rye.
Right.
We have 13% malted rye, but that 61% rye is manageable. But yeah, rye in general, we wouldn't want to be making a 95.5 rye every day. It's hard on the equipment. It's hard on the distillers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the future, not only of Liberty Pole, but of Pennsylvania whiskey. I know you guys are working hard to kind of resurrect something that has been not forgotten, because there's still people out there that are like yourself that are staying true to Pennsylvania. So where do you see Pennsylvania whiskey in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Because I know that there's newer distilleries and there's people that are, trying to do heritage stuff. Even though it might not be Pennsylvania, it might be somewhere else. But like everybody, I feel like there's been a call back to our roots. People are using heirloom grains, and they're trying to really go back to the basics of this is what whiskey is at its base. This isn't the, like you were talking about GMOs. This isn't the GMO feedstock that we're feeding to the masses. This is something special. And is that what you're trying to do with yours and Pennsylvania, is make the whiskey special again?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I will tell you, and I don't know if you see this chip on my shoulder here, but I look at what other states have been able to do to kind of identify their style, their distilleries. And you're in a state right now that's probably done better than anybody in terms of kind of defining a style, Texas whiskey. I admire that. I'm jealous of it. Some other states, New York has done it with Empire Rye. I feel like we've been a little bit slow in kind of really reclaiming our legendary status of producing Pennsylvania rye. And that's something that I hope and pray and think that we are kind of on the fast track to really making Pennsylvania rye known again. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and when I hear people talking about distilling states, I hear a lot of Texas and Colorado and New York and Indiana. And, I just don't hear Pennsylvania mentioned enough, when those comments come out. So our goal is to change that mindset and to really, to bring Pennsylvania rye back to the forefront, because, arguably we have the greatest backstory of any state in the country. And to your other question about, heritage grains, I think that, as craft distillers, and I like that term. A lot of people don't like craft distillers, but I think that's what we are. I mean, we're handcrafting all of the whiskeys that we make, but I think, craft distillers have to, kind of embrace being different, right? We're never going to out Jim Beam. We have to use heritage grains, and we have to use, long fermentations and low barrel entry proofs, and, just do things to create, a difference, right? And, Jim Beam makes great whiskey. Maker's Mark is great whiskey. Unlike craft brewers that started, 30 years ago, they were competing against pretty mediocre big brand beers.
Right.
We're not competing against, those guys. They make great whiskey. There is not a bad Kentucky major brand. They all make fantastic whiskeys. We can't compete with them on that alone. They can make a lot more of it. They can age it longer, and they can sell it for less than we can. We have to come up with new styles and kind of a different story. And that's, I think that, that's something that we're all aware of and kind of working on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you're not trying to compete with them, and you're actually not trying to compete with even the people in your general area, like Stolen Wolf and Dad's Hat. You're not trying to compete with them either. You're just trying to get a foothold and say, this is what we're doing. We're actually collaborating with these people and trying to get Pennsylvania whiskey on the map. And that's what's so cool. And I know we're doing it here in Texas. There's a lot of Texas whiskeys, like they're all jiving together and doing a thing and trying to get it out there in the world. So I'm going to give you a couple of rapid fire questions, and then we're going to wrap this thing up, because I know you got other things to do. You've had a hard day at the office, and I don't want to keep you very much longer. So if you're drinking your rye whiskey, are you drinking it neat, on the rocks, or in a cocktail?
Always neat.
Always neat. I love that.
My sons, they like an occasional whiskey on a rock, and I just can't do it. It's neat 100% of the time.
Okay, so do you have a favorite rye cocktail?
A Sazerac.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, what is one whiskey myth that you would like to bust?
That ryes will never kind of gain market share against bourbon.
I agree.
I don't know if that's a myth or not, but I do think
It is. I talk to people about rye a lot, and they're like, "What? What's that?" It's not bourbon,
Yeah.
right? And it's the same with American single malt, right? Everybody's like, "What's that? That Scotch?" I'm like, "No, it's not. It's not Scotch." Okay, this is a fun one. If George Washington showed up at the tasting room today, what bottle are you handing him first?
Oh, the old Monongahela Foolproof Rye. 100%.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, what is next for Liberty Pole? Any upcoming releases or experiments we should watch out for?
Man, timing of this question is absolutely spot on perfect, because we just almost put the finishing touches on a press release. We have, October, November, December, if you're in the retail business, it's go time, right?
Right.
Between holiday parties and gifting. So we've always kind of embraced that with, we always do a triple single barrel release the day before Thanksgiving.
Oh,
so,
wow.
And it always has a theme. This year's theme is finished whiskeys. So we are doing a triple single barrel release on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And this year it's going to be a mead finished rye. We worked with a local meadery and grabbed one of their barrels and have finished a rye whiskey in there for a year. And
wow.
It is absolutely amazing.
I'm sure.
We have a tawny port finished rye. So, it's kind of our version of maybe a Midwinter Night's Dram.
Right.
Fantastic, dark fruit essence in that. And then we have our version of kind of an American PX finished Isla whiskey. We have a PX barrel that we put into it, our almost world famous mesquite smoked rye. So it's kind of an Americanized version of a sherry finished Isla whiskey, and it's fantastic.
Wow.
We're doing another, we're actually next Friday, we're releasing our second American single malt. This is a 5-year-old collaboration we did with a local brewery. During COVID, we had some friends of ours operate a local brewery that was shut down in 2020. They were small. They didn't have a canning line. They weren't able to really generate any revenue. So we said, hey, we would love to work with you guys, give you some revenue. Can you brew us a beer? Because we don't have the ability in our distillery to do kind of off grain. Everything we do is on grain. So, so single malts, we kind of feel really need to be loudered and off grain. So those guys created us an ale, an amber ale that we asked them to, don't put any hops in it. So
please don't.
So they created us an unhopped amber ale, and it's probably, and I've tasted a lot of American single malts. This is one of the best American single malts I've ever had. Wow. It's coming out next Friday. And then we're going to release our first double oak bourbon in December. So we've got a lot of kind of fun releases coming up over the next couple months.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because this literally can fit anybody's profile. If you're into ASM, if you're into double oaked, if you're into mesquite smoked or tawny port or mead, or that's what's so cool about, like what you were saying about being a craft distillery, is you can play with those things and you could do all of that. It's, man, that is so cool. Okay. So we've talked about all the bottles. We've talked about everything. So where can people buy a bottle if they wanted one?
Yeah, you got to come to Pennsylvania pretty much. We way back when we were really even just a business plan, I talked to a distiller and he kind of said, you got to own your backyard. You got to win your backyard. There's no reason somebody in Texas will want to buy your whiskey if you're not even known in your backyard. So we took that to heart. Yeah. And we have never approached a distributor. We have never attempted to move beyond our state borders. So we're in maybe 100 of our Pennsylvania controlled fine wine and good spirit stores here in Pennsylvania. but only with our core whiskeys, our bourbon, our ryes, and our peated bourbon, and our bourbon cream. Those are available statewide. But these single releases that I was just talking about, the special releases, they're going to be distillery only. We do work with a third party, Big Thirst, that is based in DC, and they've integrated into our website. So if you come to libertypulsespirits.com and you hit the shop button, you'll have a choice of whether you're in Pennsylvania or outside of Pennsylvania. If you're outside of Pennsylvania, there's a kind of a subset of our overall portfolio. We'll have our bourbon on there, our Old Monongahela rye, our peated rye. So we have some of our products, not all of them, that can ship to 38 states.
Right. That's awesome. That's awesome. I was just looking up. I know a guy who, I think it's Mike McGinnis, who works with, Matt. Yeah. Anyway, Matt.
Yeah. Matt.
Sorry, Matt, Mike, whatever. I actually did a tasting with him recently, and it was really fun, and I got to talking with him. So guys, you can get some of their products, which is kind of cool. And I know, especially in Texas, Big Thirst is pretty prominent around here, so you can get some of their stuff. Or if you know somebody who lives in Pennsylvania, see if they can't drive you down a bottle,
And we can even give them shipping boxes. We just can't ship it for them.
Absolutely. So, okay, tell us a little bit about the tasting room. I know you said your wife was in the cocktail thing. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll let you go.
So our new campus consists of our 5-story barrel warehouse. We have a 8,000 square foot production facility. Those are both pre-engineered metal buildings, but our tasting room and our bottle shop, our tasting room, we call the meeting house. They are definitely designed architecturally to put you in the mindset that you have just entered an 18th century tavern. Big wooden trusses, lots of stone. We have a small kitchen. We have a great chef. We do, small bites. We have, entree meals, specials during the week. But we're known for our cocktails. So, going into this endeavor, we realized that not everybody was a whiskey drinker. So my wife came up with this, kind of amazing plan of, okay, well, you think you don't like whiskey, I can make you cocktails that you won't even know you're drinking whiskey. So we have 4 cocktails a month that we change every month that they're all seasonal, and they're fantastic. And people come in every month to see what's on the menu. And if they really like what was on the menu at the beginning of the month, they'll come in at the end of the month to grab one more before it rolls off for the next month. So we have these great monthly cocktails. We also have, all of the standards. I mentioned the Sazerac. We have Sazerac Old Fashions, Manhattans that are staples. They're on the cocktail menu all the time.
Right. Awesome.
We do tours. We do we do a bottle your own barrel house immersion tour where you can thief from 4 different barrels to find the barrel you like the best, fill your own bottle, take it, run it through the labeler. We have a pretty experiential place there in Washington, PA.
That's awesome.
Necessarily have to drive to Kentucky to experience, kind of a soup to nuts distillery experience.
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool. It's like you guys are just making the whole experience. You sit there, have a cocktail, you can do whatever you want, bottle your own stuff. And that to me is what really makes the whole whiskey experience. When you go to a cocktail, when you go to a distillery like that, getting the whole mamma jamma. When you go over there, it just makes it that much easier for everybody to spend a little more money, I guess. So
we had a group of guys today. Today from Philadelphia that were on their way to Kentucky, and we are literally 2 minutes off of Interstate 70, which is the main interstate into Louisville. and we get a lot of, Bourbon Trail visitors. We like to say we're either your first stop on the Bourbon Trail or your last stop if you're coming back. So that's kind of fun too.
That's awesome. Jim, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with me tonight and bringing me some excellent whiskeys. I can't wait to share these with friends. And guys, go check out. I'll have all of their stuff linked down below, even their address. So if you are making a trip up to Pennsylvania, you can go check them out. Doing some amazing stuff. Pennsylvania rye. Who knew? I mean, I knew, but you guys need to get into this because this is some crazy stuff. Stick on real fast. I want to talk with you. Y'all guys, we're getting into the holiday season. You can go to thewhiskeyshaman.com and pick you up some t-shirts. Everybody has to do their shameless plug, so I'm going to do mine too. And y'all be good. And until next time, keep your spirits up. Peace out.
Thank you.